Welcome to Bits and Pieces Quilting. Today we're going to make a kaleidoscope quilt. This time we're going to get it right. Hi, I'm Michelle and today we are going to make a kaleidoscope quilt based on a free pattern from Donna Jordan. Now if you watched this video, you'll see that I started this project and then made a very big mistake, so changed directions completely. But in this video, we're going to dive in and we're going to get it right. So let's go. For my second attempt at the kaleidoscope quilt, let me show you what I have pulled out to work with. These are, for the most part, some beautiful Tula Pink fabrics. And I've already had some experience with a pink and orange and yellow quilt. And so I think this one's going to look really, really sharp. There's some amazing fabrics in here. We saw some of these in the Mathemagical quilt. So the waves were used and these seashells were used, but then there's some other really, really beautiful ones here. I love the jellyfish. And I'm not 100% sure if that's a Tula Pink, but I'm going to put it all into this project and I think it's going to look spectacular. And this is this one, I guess, and this one are my transition pieces between the yellow and the pink. So I think that's going to look great in the kaleidoscope pattern. And then this one is the second one with these super cute squirrels, more of the ocean waves, a bit of a plain green, these jellyfish, which I think are one of my favorites of her prints, these sort of interesting hexagons, more seashells, and some more geometric kind of shapes. So I was going to mix them together, but because this is sort of a transition piece as well with the yellow and the pink. But in consultation with Jason, we decided that two quilts is probably the way to go. So these are both going to become kaleidoscope quilts, and I'm going to do them properly this time. So I need to pull some white out of my collection and get cutting. So this is Kaleidoscope Quilt attempt number 2. If you haven't seen my previous video on where I started to make this quilt and then it all went horribly wrong and I ended up with a completely different quilt, go take a look at that video. But this we're going to do right. This I promise we're going to do right. So we're going to use Donna Jordan's roundabout pattern, and I'll put a link to where you can find that free pattern from the Jordan Fabrics website. And huge thanks to Donna Jordan for all that she does to teach us about quilting and to provide some free patterns. I'm going to make this one 5 inches the way that Donna does. And I have the same ruler that Donna used as well. This is a Creative Grids 45-degree kaleidoscope and Dresden plate ruler. And the 5-inch line is marked really clearly here on the ruler. So I've got, what have I got? 4 pieces of fabric all laid out here. And using the kaleidoscope, I've already cut a number of pieces, but I thought I'd go through this fairly quickly. Donna does a great job in her video as well. And I do a great job of showing how to do this in my other video. It's the next step where everything kind of fell apart. But using the ruler with the 45-degree angle, just line it up along the 5-inch strip and then cut like that down the edge of the ruler. And then you can flip it over and continue cutting all the way along. I did that for all of my different fat quarters in these fabulous pink and yellow colorways. A bunch of them are Tula Pink fabrics and they look fabulous. I did the same thing with my white background pieces. So I have a whole stack of these triangles. And then I went over to the sewing machine and I sewed the printed pieces to the background pieces. And in this instance, so if you saw the video where it all went wrong, what I ended up doing was doing this, which is very wrong if you're trying to make a kaleidoscope quilt. This is how you get a row of triangles and not a circle of triangles. So don't do this. This is what I've already done, and this doesn't work. What you want to do is you want to sew them the same way. So with a background fabric and a printed fabric, you want them to go like this so that they all start to spin around in a circle. And the flat tops here are very nice to reduce the bulk in the final project and then also to help you lay them up like this. Your 1/4 inch seam will start right on the edge of this flat top and go all the way down. And when you do that, you'll get a unit that looks like this. If I fold this back, because I have it pressed already, if I fold this back, you can see it's just the two triangles sitting on top of each other. But when I unfold it, I have a nice little point there because those flat edges have lined up. And if you know me, you know that I like to press my seams open. And so once you have a huge stack of these two patch units, these 2Zs, then I went and sewed them together into a 4Z. So taking one set of two and another set of two into these. And then when you take two of these and sew them together, you get the roundabout in the title of Donna's quilt pattern. So you get this shape, which is really beautiful. It looks a little bit like a circus tent, I think. I've been pressing all my seams open, again, like I mentioned, and look how flat these are. I love how flat this is. For Christmas this year, for myself and for Mum, I got us tailor's clappers. And I don't know if you've ever used one of these. I think Lori Holt uses one all the time. I've never used one. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to give it a try. So I bought this tailor's clapper. It's maple, maybe? It's a pretty heavy wood. It's heavy for its size when you look at it. So it's definitely not pine. It's definitely a hardwood. And I have been using this on my ironing board. So I would start by ironing this piece. I flip it over, press the seam open and iron it. And then I'll lay it on the ironing board and put that on top of it. And then I'll go on to the next piece and I'll iron it and get it ready. And then I'll move the clapper on top of that seam and then stack these ones up and back and forth with the clapper holding down the last piece I just ironed in order to get that seam extra flat. And I feel like there's a noticeable difference. Maybe it's just me, maybe I want to see a difference, but I've been really enjoying this. And it was incredible because I'm filming this quite early in January. I've only used it for a few days now. Pulling it up off the ironing board as I finished ironing a batch of pieces, it felt a lot like I imagine a hot water bottle would feel. Very, very, very warm to the touch. Not hot, but very, very warm to the touch. And I can see how that constant heat and pressure on the seam really helps to keep things flat. And I've been really happy with the way it worked with these pieces because there's a lot of pieces of fabric coming together into a point here. But the clapper really, really seems to have helped to flatten that nice and flat. So the next step, I'm going to finish making all of these. I'm going to make 48 of these for a 6x8 layout. And I'll do up the math between takes here, and I will put up, and I'll double check Donna Jordan's pattern as well to see how many blocks she makes. If my numbers are different than hers, then I will share with you how many pieces of each that you need. But I am going to finish these, and then I need to go back to the pattern and figure out what size of corner pieces I need and whether the corner pieces go on the background fabric or on the printed fabric or both. And if you've seen my video on quilting mistakes, you'll see that I've made this project a number of times and I consistently forget to go back to the pattern and check. And so it usually turns out different every time. But this time I'm going to check and we are going to make this exactly the way that Donna intended us to. Once my pile of 4Zs, I guess, is all joined together and everything has been pressed, I don't sort them out the same way that I do the pairs, but I do go through the whole pile and carefully match them up 2x2. In this case, I have enough variety that I won't repeat any fabric in any block, and I will try to pay a little bit of attention between the orange and the pink to try and get a nice balance across the blocks. So it'll just take a moment to go through this whole pile and pick up the 2x2s that I think are going to look good together. And then I'll sew all of those together so I have the full number of 48 blocks that we need for this project. We're over here at the machine and I've zoomed you in and I want to show you how I sew these two pieces together. You can see I've got a nice 1/4 inch seam allowance here where my points all come to meet. And I want the final block to have those points meeting really well. So what I do is I lay them together and then I peel them back and adjust as needed so that I can see that those points line up. Now you can pin this or you can clip this, but I find that just holding it and then putting it under the machine works really, really well. I'll sew the first half like this, and what I'm doing as I'm getting closer to the center is I'm trying to aim as best as possible for this corner, this point where these seam allowances all meet. That's going to give me a nice sharp point for my corners. Then with the needle down, I'll pause and I'll take a moment and make sure that this last half of the block is lined up properly before sending it through the machine. And it's really as simple as that. Like I said, you can pin this if you want, or you can use a clip. So if I were to use a clip, I would do the same thing. I would take these pieces and I would just work them together until I'm confident that those points match. And then with a clip, I would put a clip right in that center spot like that. And if I were using a pin, I would probably do it exactly the same way. Then put these ends under the presser foot. Sew my 1/4 inch seam. I've been using this seam guide not that long. I was finding I was having problems with my 1/4 inch, and this has really helped me to be a bit more accurate. It is magnetic. It just it's very strong, but it just magnetizes right down onto my plate here, whatever this is called. And so I just line this up where I know my 1/4 inch seam allowance is, but it does have an impact on clips as they go by. So I keep the clip on as long as possible, then pop the clip on and continue to hold it with my finger. And then just as I showed you in the previous one, make sure that the needle goes into that center point as best as possible. Take a moment to make sure that these are aligned and then finish the stitching. Now I have also seen with a nice straight pin, I've also seen wonderful teachers put this pin right, right, ooh, that's tough, right into that spot where you want your seams to match. And then to take the second piece and using that pin, putting it into the spot where you want those seams to match, and then leaving that pin, holding those two pieces together perfectly, and then putting that pin nice and tight so that you know your points are exactly where you want them to be. Again, lining up these edges. And because of my seam guide, again, my pin isn't going to be able to go all the way in. But I suppose if I don't have my seam guide on, you would come along, pull the pin out, because you never, and you know this, right? You never sew over a pin. Make sure that your needle hits that point where you marked your points, and then keep sewing along. I'm just going to stick in my little thread buddy here, and let's take a look at how we did with some of these points. Hopeful that they're going to look good. So that's the one with the pin. That looks really good. Then we did this one with the clip. That one also not so bad, but that's acceptable for me. And then for this one that I just held with my fingers, that one also looks really, really good. So whatever approach works for you to try and make that as accurate as you can, you sew these blocks together. I've double checked the pattern, and Donna makes her layout is 7 blocks by 8 blocks for 56 in total. I've decided on a 6 by 8 block layout. So in terms of the pattern, you will need to cut 192 print squares and 192 background squares to do the 6 by 8 layout like I have done. So Once you've sewn your twosies and then your foursies all the way as we've been through, once you sew your twosies into foursies into your block, the next step is to add the corners. Now, I double checked, triple checked the pattern. So, because if we're following Donna's pattern, which we are, then we need to sew light corners onto all the blocks. Some of them get sewn like this with light matching light, and some of them get sewn with the light corners onto the printed fabrics. You'll see in this first picture that I did that successfully, and this was the first time I'd ever made this pattern, and I love it. It was all in batiks. The next time I made the pattern, I didn't bother to double check. So I ended up using dark corners in these spaces. And it makes a very effective quilt, but it is still a little different. And I'm not sure that the circle illusion is quite as strong as it will be with the lights in the corner. And then the third time I made this quilt, you think I would have learned from the second time, but of course I didn't. The third time I made this quilt, I thought you put lights with lights and darks with darks. So that's what I did, and you get yet a different look for this quilt. Are these wrong? Are these mistakes? I don't know. That's up to you. But today we're going to do the quilt the way that Donna has designed the pattern. So we need light squares on the lights, light squares on the darks, evenly divided amongst our squares. Now I sewed mine on, and Donna's instructions are great because she talks about pressing these ones pressing the seams away from the center, and then on the dark where we sew the light squares onto the dark, pressing the seams towards the center and away from the center. That way when we go to line up our blocks, these seams will intersect and it'll be easier to nest those seams and to try and match them up. So that's what I did. But what I found when I sewed these pieces together, so sewed them together and then pressed them away from the center in this instance, then I went to start to trim up my blocks, and I realized that the 9.5 inch that Donna recommends, and if you read her pattern, you'll see that she actually trimmed hers to 9 3/8. 9.5 works quite well across the printed sections, but some of my blocks, it's really challenging for these white triangles to pull all the way out to the 9.5. So this one isn't so bad, but I don't know if you can see down here, it's just a smidge past 9.25. I'm going to have to be really careful when I sew these blocks together. This little pile over here, let me slide it over. This little pile here is all that I have trimmed off of these blocks because there is nothing at all to spare. 4 3/4 is the center. So if I want that center point on the center, I can see that I've got 9.5 quite well with my printed triangles, but some of this is not so great. And so the next time I make this quilt pattern, and that might actually be very soon because I have some beautiful teal Tula Pink fabric, so I might make a second one right away. I think what I would do is make the corner triangles, the corner squares, a little bigger, either 3 3/4 or 4 inches rather than the 3.5 in the pattern, just to give me that little bit of leeway so that this doesn't happen, so that I actually have something to trim off and square down, so that I know that my blocks are the size they need to be and maybe not just a smidge short in a few places. I guess it just sort of speaks to, because Donna's pattern is perfect, and if you are perfect, then absolutely follow those perfect instructions. But this has just confirmed to me that I am absolutely not perfect at all. And in order to strive to be a little closer to perfection, having the pieces a little bit bigger so that I have something to trim down is probably the right answer. Now, I found it really interesting that pressing these seams out gave me all of those dog ears that I wanted to trim off. Pressing the seams in towards the darks put all of those little dog ear pieces inside the quilt, so there's really nothing to trim off here. I am also a little bit nervous about how accurate these are, but I'm hoping that my consistency will at least carry the day. So there's a few, again, there's a few where that sort of, that one is actually really, really good. There's a few areas where it sticks out more than it should, and it's a little shy where it shouldn't be. And so this is why I think the next time I make it, I'm going to make these corner squares just a little bit bigger. So now the next step is to lay these out, and that's going to be really exciting. And it's really simple. You just lay the two different, let me slide this over, the two different squares across and down. So I'm going to lay them out here on the floor in my sewing room. I'm not going to have enough room to lay the whole quilt out, but I'll probably lay out the top half, sew that together, then lay out the bottom half, and then sew that together.
This is the first 4 rows laid out on the floor of my sewing room, and you can already see the illusion of the swirls and the circles starting to emerge. I think it's gonna look so spectacular. And then we'll transition to the photo of the finished quilt top, and look at that. Isn't it beautiful? I'm so, so happy with this, and especially after the false start with the other quilt that turned into a bunch of triangles, this just gives me great satisfaction to see how well it's turned out. But stay tuned because let's see if we can make a baby quilt.
So because this is bits and pieces quilting, and because the full-size quilt turned out so beautifully, you just know, don't you, that we're going to try and dig into all of these scraps and pieces, and I'm going to try and make a baby quilt out of what's left. So what is that going to look like? I think that's going to be 20 blocks, so a 4x5 setting. And now I already have one complete extra and enough pieces here for a second block. So that's 2 out of 20. So I need to make 18 more, which means I need 36 more print triangles and 36 more background triangles. Now the background's going to be easy. I have another piece of the white fabric here. So the background's going to be easy. But what I also want to do is use up the pieces I have here. So I have an extra one here, which is great. I have some of these pieces, which aren't quite big enough. But if I can find their matches in this pile, I'm going to be able to piece some of these blocks. So I'm going to be able to sew that together and get a triangle. This is going to take a few minutes to gather up all the bits and pieces. There's a few here that I'll be able to cut out to get some more. And then I have a couple of extra fabrics that I didn't use in the original. And I'll be able to cut some of these pieces, and there's some more seashells. So I think that there is enough to scramble together enough to make a 4x5 layout of these same designs. So I'm going to play around and I'll show you how I've cut some of the pieces, and let's hope, fingers crossed, let's hope that I can get enough to do this. I've been sewing the bits and pieces together and it is turning into a really successful experiment. So check out some of these. Look at that. Can you see the seam? It's perfect. I've pressed all my seams open, of course, but look at that. That's going to be a beautiful piece. And this is just dumb luck. It's like matching wallpaper, and I didn't even intend for that to happen, but the pattern has matched up perfectly, which is just completely thrilling. There's a few funny ones in here, like these ones, where I just need a little bit on the corner in order to make this work. And so let me show you what I'm going to do with these pieces. So if I take this strange one, I'm just going to, because I want to cut this side, and I'm very right-handed. So I'm going to just lay my piece down and then lay this on top. I know that the side and the top and the bottom are well lined up because these were the extra. And now I'm just going to take my cutter and just slice off the end. And so I'm left, I'm going to come up really close. See that little seam right there? You can see it on the back. But that gives me another complete block, and you can hardly even see the seam, which is crazy exciting. So I'm going to go through this whole pile and do that. This was interesting. I'm just going to it was literally a crazy leftover piece, but I'll be able to get my triangle out of the middle of that block. Lots of these ones with just a little bit added onto the corner just to expand a little bit. I think this is going to work out so well. There's probably almost 20 blocks in there done that way. And then I have a few of the whites as well, where I've sewn the ends together, and I will cut these ones out as well just to expand because I need to stretch out my background fabric a little bit. So I'll cut this. I might even be able to get two of them out of here, which would be super amazing. So I'm going to cut those. I want to show you the ones that didn't work though. I had taken two of these little leftover triangles and I had sewn them together like this, trying to make a larger piece. So that's what these are. But what happened, in an effort to get things to line up, I needed to leave a little bit of a seam allowance, really enough for the 1/4 inch. And now these pieces are not anywhere close to the 5 inches that I need. Do you see that? That's way too short. So the plan had been to sew a bunch of these together in the hopes of getting it wide enough to get my triangle, but these were just too small to make this work. But I've got loads of pieces in here and I am looking forward to cutting these up and adding them to this project. As we discussed in the earlier part of the video, for these supplementary blocks, I have cut the corner squares a 1/4 inch bigger. I cut them at 3 3/4. Donna's pattern says 3 1/2, but I wasn't happy with the amount that I had available to trim off. And that's a me problem, not a Donna problem. But for these ones, I cut them at 3 3/4, and I am much happier. I would much rather trim off these little bits and make sure I have a nice square block rather than to risk falling short because my seam allowance isn't perfect. This block is also interesting to show you because can you see from there that there are two pieced pieces in this block? I think this one's pretty easy to see. This is a little harder. Let me bring it up really close. Can you see that seam and then this seam here as well? But in the finished product, I don't think that's ever going to be noticeable. So I'm really thrilled with the way those are turning out. And so let me show you what it looks like to trim this one up compared to the ones we did earlier. Again, 4 3/4 and 4 3/4 is where my center mark goes. And then you can see that for the most part, my triangle pieces hit 9 1/2 exactly as they should. And then I've got a little bit that I can trim off around the edges. And this is going to help me get a nice square block, which I really, really like. And you can see that the amount I'm trimming off isn't the same everywhere, which says something about my seam allowances and my sewing abilities, which is why that extra little bit just makes a lot of sense for me. So it's going to lay that down, slice around two sides. Didn't quite catch that. There we go. Spin this around, and then I'm going to have a nice square block that's fully 9 1/2 inches square with no corners that are a little skinny. It's very satisfying. And as I said, I'm a bit repetitive here, but having that little bit to trim off is far preferable to me than having my block fall just a little bit short. Thanks very much for watching this video on the Kaleidoscope quilt. It's a wonderful free pattern from Donna Jordan, and I'll put a link in the description down below. I hope you like the finished project and the little bonus quilt that we were able to get out of the leftover bits and pieces. This is a fabulous project. I've given you a few tips and tricks along the way. It's quick, it's easy, and I really like that it's adjustable for both the number of blocks, but also the size. If you want to make 5-inch triangles, you can, or you can make them bigger or smaller. It's a really flexible pattern, and the triangles really showcase the fabric. It goes together really quickly and is a great project. Thanks very much for watching, and don't forget to make the most of your fabric bits and pieces.